This is from the website thewaythetruithandthelife.net. This is the introduction to caring. It is the 34th level of the Ontological Encyclipedia. This is Tuesday, the 17th of February, 2015. Caring is an interesting foundation to start with because it's something we all have a need for, and it is a problem in human evolution. We go back to the great apes and they care for their young. The female maternal nursing bond is respected, and the mothers often breastfeed till the second molars. That would be equivalent to 5 or 6 years old. They do not perform infanticide, very rare maternal infanticide, but with humans there's a history of it. You can look it up. The women getting rid of their babies and not wanting to be with them, put them in daycare. This affluence has always led to proliferation of daycare, babysitters, surrogate parents to send the baby to, and wet nurses, as I said. And we find that infanticide is quite common, abortions now, that it wasn't true with maternal great apes. There's a bond of the infant to the mother. When you hook up the brain monitoring, an infant has a calming response to the mother's voice. Another woman saying the same thing or singing the same song has a stress reaction. That's right from the womb. That's why they need for the maternal nursing bond, for the growth foundation, while the nerve growth factor, the chemicals are there for the brain to grow. Once they're gone, that development doesn't happen. The experiments with visual cortex, covering animals' eyes, and then at various periods uncovering them and investigating the brain growth in the visual cortex. There's a period where there's no more brain growth factor present, and all the stimulation in the world doesn't bring the visual cortex development. It's the same thing with many parts of the human brain. There are certain times in development that for the child, they need a continuous of that movement that they had while they were in the womb. That's why they like the rocking. That's why we like dancing. That's why we like the rhythm of music. Boom, 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 boom. That's the heartbeat from when we were inside our mother. But these things are so important, but yet in Russia today, some years there's more abortions than live births, and the population is going down. In Kenmore, New York, where I live, I was shocked to see they take babies into daycare at 6 weeks old now. But probably earlier in other places because it's legal. So I think of the woman minister in France, either minister of finance or something, and she was pregnant and to not miss work, she wanted the baby, not miss work. She had where they cut her open and take the baby out, and she was back to work within a week. And somebody taking care of the baby. But that's just an introduction. Caring is so important, and we'll look into the observations of it and the fact that humans have changed And there's a good insight into that. It has to do with um, the male, dominant male, whether you're talking about rabbits, cats, dogs, humans, monkeys, the dominant male that beats up all the other boys and rapes the female is the one who makes the babies. And the female that is attracted or attractive to that dominant male is the one that tends to have babies. And I know with my own daughters and granddaughters, when the little children like to show their body, especially the girls. And that's the teenage girls that's ready to strip in public. Now we have the femmes that are doing that, but that's another thing. Not that the human body is bad, but just to understand that being attractive to the dominant male and being raped is a historical program for who has babies. And it'd be good to understand that and use our knowledge that if we can take wolves and in a few generations breed puppy dogs out of them, we could do something to help with breeding, choosing the mother and father well in human breeding too. But that, of course, that was given a bad reputation by the Nazis because they did so much evil. Women have gotten rid of their unwanted babies by throwing them off cliffs, throwing them in the river, leaving them out in the woods for the animals to get. And then in later times, building idols to sacrifice the children to. It's rumored in Jewish history that Abraham's father was a maker of idols, that people would have their personal idol, and what they didn't want, they would sacrifice to it. That actually, that's the Jewish history was interesting to me. I spoke with Bruno Bettelheim while he was making a circuit of the universities after his retirement from the University of Chicago. That he had written a number of books that I had read, and one of them was on folk tales, which is the background to his response to a question I asked him. And after his lecture, question and answer period, I asked him, "Are you religious?" And he said, "Well, I'm Jewish, but I'm not religious, but I have a great respect for the Jewish Bible," because in his research for this folk tales, he found many of these stories. Of course, the Jewish Bible was not written down until hundreds and hundreds of years, where the stories were carried on word of mouth. In the storytelling cultures, with the elders respected, at night around the fire, the elders would tell stories that, and then the nonsense would get lost, the things that would help their children and grandchildren have some wisdom were the stories. And he said these stories existed in a number of the storytelling cultures around the Mediterranean that he had studied. The idea of the jealous brother and these things. But the idea that how important caring is that Abraham is the archetype example of not sacrificing your child to God or your idol or whatever. Abraham set this example, and the Jewish people were a set-aside people who did not sacrifice their children. And then they go through the time in Egypt where Pharaoh could kill whoever he wanted. And they come out with Moses, and they're traveling there in Israel. And Moses got these commandments about caring that even Pharaoh could not murder people. And that you needed to love with all your heart and soul and mind. And later on, as Jesus said, love thy neighbor as thyself. There's people that go around preaching hate self. I don't understand, because love for others is built on loving yourself. And that's the problem with autism today. In daycare, the babies don't care enough. They're banging their head on the wall. You just look at the Ceausescu in Romania wanted to build the population with the abortion and birth control. Romania is a communist country. Let me interject here. One of the foundation pillars of communism was the breakdown of marriage, women's liberation, and the idea that women would be out in the Kohidnets or whatever they call them, working, and they would collectively take care of the children. They valued children as the next generation. They just didn't understand how important the maternal nursing bond was. That Engels said marriage is just an invention of the upper power males, that they can have somebody to pass on their wealth and power to. So with the class struggle, hatred for the haves by the have-nots, the women's liberation joined this very easily with their resentment of the male. That we'll understand more about later on. It's only natural because of all the rape and domination, genetic history of it. But let's get on with it. Now, I need to interject here. I was surprised to understand it's not just female resentment of the dominant male, it's male resentment of the dominant male also. The males have a genetic history of being beat up, and they go off in the bushes and still propagate, but that's away from the alpha male. But the good friend of mine was an anarchist, and I never understood anarchy. Here, the anarchists work with the women's liberation. They're all against the power structure because there's an inbred hate for that violent, dominant male. That's the way it is. This would lead us into the need for a father figure, a caring, authority figure with the strength to protect and the ability to confront the mother when she abuses the child, and when see the child reacting with the pain of being not respected, that you can stand with them, that identity of as an adult. You know, that nice little model of parent, child, adult, and the adult cross, when a dominating woman is talking to a child who naturally, if they're respected, has an adult frame of mind. They're reasoning and responsible, and they're talked down to like they're dirt. You got dirt on your shoes. And the father sees the child hurt and stands with them. That's not right to speak to so-and-so like that. You need to respect her. That's wrong what you're doing. But at any rate, these things have gotten lost because the respect for male authority includes good or bad, the lack of it, I mean. And not that it doesn't still exist, it does. Those who have had a loving father understand the value of it, and it's heartwarming. But let's get on with it. I need to add here, it's not just resentment of the dominant male, it's resentment of the institutions, the contempt for Christianity because it restricts their behavior off in the bushes. you begin to understand it. It's hard for me to see the alliance between liberals and Muslims, but under Islam, there's for some there's liberation, for others there's an attraction to the dominant male, and for others it's just the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Now back to Ceausescu in Romania, losing population. So he made a law that no more birth control and no abortion. And if you can't keep your children, we'll raise them for you. And so when he was finally overthrown, they killed him and his wife. Here were all these orphanages, and they went and the children just going like that and banging themselves and hitting themselves, and because you can feed them and change them and bathe them, but if you don't pick them up and care for them, they're not going to develop healthy to even love themselves. That's a whole other story that women's livers will probably cover up. Just like here we've got a measles outbreak, and that evil doctor that for a couple $100,000 from lawyers who get money from the drug companies when they sue because for parents that have autism, and they get a third of the settlement, and there's billions of dollars being given out to parents with children with autism. And the truth of the matter is, that's one of the reasons why I had so much respect for Bruno Bettelheim, and knows that he had a home for autistic children, and he did his best to make up for the lack of care that they had. But at any rate, then discipline has another thing to do with that. But that's getting besides the point. Autism, this false doctor lost his license when an investigative reporter found out it was all fraud. But he now is worshipped. That was in England. He lost his medical license. He's Canadian. He come to America, and he's hailed like a Jesus Christ of the women's liberation and children's autism. And it was all false that mercury is the cause of autism. Even the Amish families who still have the tradition of breastfeeding and the mother in the home, even they have the inoculations, they don't have the autism. They didn't have it when I was a child. Let's move on with it. I need to interject here about Bruno Bettelheim. His family in Austria owned a lumber company, and when they were telling the Jews to get out, he sold his business, and him and his wife were ready to leave, and he was arrested on their exit and put in a Nazi concentration camp. He was let go in 1939. Then there's a couple of theories, but one of the big Nazi umpty-umps had a birthday, and they let some Jews go out of the country. There's also a story that maybe Mrs. Roosevelt paid money to get him out. But at any rate, he came to America and became a professor. In him and his wife in Austria had taken in an American child, Jewish child, who was autistic, and raised her. So he had a foundation of care for autism. I'd add here, as a shame, I wished I'd have been with him when he died. He put a bag over his head and suffocated himself. His daughters didn't have anything to do with him. The Jews and the women's liberationists turned against him because he said the truth about autism. The women's liberation turned against him for the truth about autism. The Jews turned against him because when one of his comrades who had been in the Nazi concentration camp wrote a book about it, and invited Bruno to write the foreword. And Bruno, in the foreword to this book about the Jews, which he was one of them in a concentration camp, said that the Jews were in part responsible for what happened to them because the Nazis told them what they were going to do, but they were too uh, too attracted to their power, wealth, and property. They would send their children to England or something, but they would not leave because they were too attracted to their worldly wealth, and they would lose it if they left. So I have a lot of respect for him. I just felt so terrible that he was rejected by his own family and the Jewish community and women caregivers. Here he suffocated himself in a senior citizens home. I'd have loved to have been able to just go visit as often as he needed my love. But now let's get back to it and the history of the Jews caring about children and how it led them to acts of violence against an evil culture. And there's tribes that are murdering them, and these tribes, this one tribe had worship. I think it was god Moloch, but in the Bible where it says making your children pass through the fire, that means sacrificing to your god. One of the gods was Moloch, and they had big statues of him with his arms out, and they'd build a fire down in the pit there, and the priests would beat on drums while the mothers would take them, put their unwanted babies in the arms, and they'd roll down into the fire to be sacrificed to Moloch. Well, Joshua, who took over after Moses, had the Jewish people go and exterminate the whole village that was doing this and attacking the Jews to make it a safe place for children. That they didn't take, like Muhammad, they didn't take women and children and booty. They said, leave everything. Just get rid of that evil culture that murders children. And as far as killing the children that are part of that culture, how do you deal with this? We got a culture we can see with memorizing the Quran, and these children from earliest years, they're ready to strap on a suicide bomb and go murder a bunch of people because they'll go to Allah's heaven, and their family will get a bunch of money from some rich Saudi prince. But that's a whole nother thing. I don't want to get too distracted here, but the idea of respecting children and how it's lost now. But let's go on with it now. What I mean with their genetic experiments, they gave the work with genetics such a bad name that now we allow predictable, genetically damaged children who will suffer all their life and die young or live a longer life of suffering, and we don't prevent it. Where it's good, the genetic health of the mother and father can easily be determined, and we could prevent genetically damaged children in many cases. And now we have a thing where there are human rights organizations that thrive on like this and give me money, and what they're doing, the main reason for the fundraising is they've got a network that's doing the fundraising, and that's the way they make a living, or they're out there supposedly serving the community. I was chairman of the board of a 17-church charity, Concerned Ecumenical Ministries of the Upper West Side in Buffalo, and other things that I did. I put on a seminar for the needs of children, and a 10-week seminar, and had professors and experts on the different ages. And there were a bunch of nuns there, so forth. This is the Unitarian Church, and it got advertised by word of mouth, I guess. But there was a Presbyterian church there that had a charity that had gone unpopulated. I don't know how to say the right word. But I was invited to, they wanted to reorganize this charity, and I was invited to the organizing committee meeting because of the work I had done on the needs of children. I had to do, I forget the exact title of that charity. At any rate, what it turned out was it was a bunch of social workers with university and college degrees that wanted a job. So they were trying to get this charity started up again so they could be raising funds and pay their salary and be involved in community support. I don't want to, of course, say that, but there's a profit motive. And there's other things having to do with what's happened to the not-for-profit organizations in the UN. The UN non-profit organization was the origin of an effort in Canada about 12 years ago to have the Bible banned as hate speech because it had something against homosexuality. And the problems Russia is having, where ends up all these NGOs, non-governmental organizations, human rights, that have been going from Europe and America to there. Turns out they're dominated by liberal, women's liberationists, and homosexuals working together. And they go to Russia with this agenda to make homosexual marriage, just like Obama went with his wife to Africa advocating it, and you don't see it on television, but he was booed and eggs thrown at him. But that's a whole nother thing. If you make a bunch of lesbian federal judges to hear the case where the state had a democratic vote and the people didn't want to redefine marriage as between a man and a man, but the judges said, no, that's a violation of human rights. So you can see the way that goes, and we can look into that. Of course, the main thing about marriage is it's a tax break. I think we should take the tax break away from married couples that are both working, because they're saving money already, both living in the same house. A single person working should get a break. Where's the logic to this? It was originally because the mother was in the home and to help support maternal care for the children. You could look into Germany and how Merkel and her liberals got that changed. Germany was cited by Obama after his second election, his State of the Union message, how we need to get more early childhood daycare education. There's Germany, the children are graduating from high school with a year higher level ability than the American students. And what he didn't say was Germany's had a policy of the mothers in the home, and they couldn't even get state daycare for their children if they were a married woman. The ones who had a baby without a father, they could get daycare. At any rate, the children in Germany were starting school a year later, 6 or 7, and they graduate at a year advanced. And I know as a teacher, it's not, the younger the student, the more important your effect is. And the most important is the mother in the home. That's why Germany built a reputation as a country that had not built by just saying it. Their products had the highest quality in the world. The German productivity and the quality control, and it's built on a strong foundation of integrity that comes from a caring home, early childhood with a father and a mother in the home and a father that's respected. And that now Merkel and her liberationists have gotten that law done away with, where the married women can dump the children and you get the provided daycare now too. So you'll watch what happens to that society in the future. But that's a whole another ball of wax. I need to end this now and get on with the work on the encyclopedia. This is supposed to just be an introduction, but I wanted to give you an overview of caring and what is degrading it. I thank you. Goodbye.